It's the mother of all talk shows. It's the mother of all talk shows. It's the mother of all talk shows. Go get 'em, George.
George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway.
Another week, another leading presidential candidate in the European Union banned from standing. Romania last week, and this week France, where Marine Le Pen, who looked like she was able to beat little Macron into a Napoleonic hat, will not, after all, be able to stand. She's home alone with an ankle bracelet. Another day, another mass slaughter in Gaza, this time of a United Nations clinic where umpteen children have been slaughtered. One of them, a decapitated baby, shown to the cameras. Unlike the mythical decapitated babies that we were told that all kinds of leaders, including senile Joe Biden, had actually seen. But actually he didn't, because no such hideous crime was committed on October 7th. But it was in Gaza today. And go Greenland! The propaganda levels have been ratcheted up to World War II levels. Goebbels himself could have offered the 100 million view video which sets out the moral case for the Americans to invade Greenland, which currently belongs to their obescent ally Denmark. And it's the 100th birthday of Britain's man of the century, the Right Honourable Anthony Wedgwood Benn. It's all coming up tonight on the mother of all talk shows. Stay tuned.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway, the mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway, the world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
The Right Honourable Anthony Wedgwood Benn would be 100 years old tomorrow. Sadly, he is no longer with us. He passed away in 2014. Gayatri and I attended his funeral, and all kinds of interesting people were there, sitting on the same bench right in front of us in St Margaret's Chapel at Westminster, where Gerry Adams, Martha McGuinness, Tony Blair and Cherie Blair I don't know how happy Mr. Benn would have been at the congregation as a whole, though he was the most gracious of men and the most forgiving of men, able to forgive even close to blasphemy within his own family, almost all of whom disavowed their father's works. But his works were the most significant and the most important in British politics, not just in my lifetime, but long before my lifetime. He was our man of the century. He was a quintessentially British socialist, a parliamentarian, a mass orator, and always ahead of his time, innovative in the extreme. He was a master of television. And across all three platforms, all three media, he dominated British politics decade after decade. I first met him in 1971 and was there as he was carried out of the church in 2014. He was the most significant political influence in my lifetime. He was my political father, with all respect to my own father. He was gracious, noble. He was a towering giant of a man, morally and intellectually. He was educated at the best schools and the best universities. He fought in the war. He hated war as a result. He fought for peace across decades, opposing war after war after war, and always being on the right side. He stood with the mining communities in Britain when none of the other front-rank Labour politicians did so. That's me and him, and Arthur Scargill, the miners' leader, in that picture there. He stood with the downtrodden and the oppressed everywhere. He went on the BBC and eschewed their ban on him announcing the Disasters Emergency Committee emergency telephone number through which people could donate to an earlier massacre in Gaza, for those that think it all began on October the 7th, the year before last. Mr. Benn was a hero of mine, and many of us, millions of us, miss him every day. And when we see the political class that governs us now, the political class that passes for the opposition now, he merely grows in stature. He was eloquent beyond belief. But as I'm coming to you tonight from Bristol, I wanted to talk about a little remembered aspect of his personality. He was a man ahead of his time. When Postmaster General, he introduced postage stamps with other than the Queen's face on them for the first time, with Her Majesty's full agreement. But it was innovation in a Britain that had hitherto been tied to tradition. But not far from where I'm sitting now, 800 yards or so from where I'm sitting now, Mr. Benn introduced the Concorde. He battled in Cabinet for the funds necessary. He gave the designers free rein to produce a thing of such beauty that even long after it had ceased to fly commercially, it had the capacity, the capability of stopping you, making your head turn and go, ah. He was a master of innovation and technology. He was, as I say, a socialist, but not a dogmatic one. He was a common sense socialist. And I personally will never forget him. He will be on my mind until the very end. And because 100 years is a very auspicious number, I wanted to dedicate the show tonight to the late and great best Prime Minister we never had, the Right Honourable Anthony Wedgwood Benn. Another week and another ban on a front-running candidate for a European Union presidency. The ban on Marine Le Pen almost beggars belief. It would have beggared belief if they hadn't done exactly the same thing to the leading presidential candidate in Romania just a week or so ago. Now, I don't carry water for either of these two banned presidential frontrunners, but I do believe, like Mr. Benn believed, that the people have to be free to choose their own leaders and they have to be able to remove them. But in the European Union today, that is no longer true. Perhaps it never was. But insofar as we once had a democracy, if we did in the European Union, it is fast disappearing. And it can only be a matter of time before in Britain the same sort of thing happens. Either they co-opt the leading challengers to their rule, or they destroy them. And if not physically destroy them, though they are certainly not above doing that, they ensure that the challenge that these people represent will no longer exist. Little Macron was set to be knocked into a Napoleonic three-cornered hat by Marine Le Pen, who stands on, I think, a bogus mixture of economic nationalism, which never actually comes to pass. If you want an example, look at Meloni. Signora Meloni in Italy was the Marine Le Pen of Italy, except she's changed absolutely nothing at all. And probably Le Pen would have been the same, though she could not have been depended on certain key questions. And one of those, and the main reason why she has been removed from the ballot as President of the Republic of France, is the question of Ukraine. Ditto what happened to Georgescu in Romania. Neither of them are big fans or supporters of Vladimir Putin. Neither of them are enemies of Ukraine, but both of them would not have agreed to their country's never-ending march towards the guns. That's the truth of the matter. They have removed Marine Le Pen, not because of her attitude to Muslims or immigrants or black people or any of the other liberal claptrap that you will hear and read in the liberal newspapers, who joyously welcomed her electronic tag and her forbidden presidential run. It's all about Ukraine. It's all about the never-ending war with Russia, which is deepening rather than coming swiftly to a conclusion. It's abundantly clear that Donald Trump is out of there. He is now, today, entertaining a leading Russian who was on the sanctioned list and who should have been arrested on arrival in Washington. But quietly, Donald Trump removed that sanction on that individual, and he's sitting now in the White House. He happens to be the head of the Russian Sovereign Wealth Fund. So that's the level that talks between Russia and the United States have now reached. It's going very soon in America to be business as usual. But the Europeans are rushing to fill the gap. The fact that they have not the men nor the money to actually fight Russia has not stopped them placing their entire societies effectively on a war footing. The British government yesterday introduced a Foreign Agents Registration Act. Well, they'd already introduced it, but now they've put it up on the government website. I don't know what to say. I'm actually an agent of anybody that you bully, Keir Starmer. You can count me as an agent on anybody you're dropping bombs on anybody you're helping others to drop their bombs on. First and foremost, I am a foreign agent on behalf of the Palestinian people. And I am a foreign agent on behalf of the Iranian people if you start bombing them. I am a foreign agent on behalf of the Yemeni people because you are involved in mass murder in Yemen. You see where I'm going with this, Sir Keir? You can arrest me as I come out the studio if you like, but the person who will be in the dock at the subsequent trial will be you and not me. But this McCarthyite witch hunting of people like Craig Murray, the Honourable Craig Murray, former British ambassador and Foreign Office grandee, who was stopped and huckled at Edinburgh Airport. People like Richard Medhurst, the half-Syrian Christian, who wears a cross around his neck, but who was arrested first in England, then in Vienna, as somehow some kind of terrorist. Kitklarenberg, my colleague, journalist from the Grey Zone, arrested in handcuffs at Luton Airport, I think it was. Do you think we're going to take all this lying down? Sir Keir, the least popular Prime Minister that Britain has ever had, his ratings are at 13% this evening. 13% of people in Britain approve of Prime Minister Keir Starmer. I mean, I don't know how popular I would be in such a poll, but I'm absolutely certain it would be greater than the Prime Minister of Britain. But whether that's true or it isn't true, we are not going to go quietly into this good night. We are not going to participate in your McCarthyite japes. We are not going to stay silent while you twist and distort every fact, every reality, because you are hoodwinking the people. The British people in their heart know that we cannot fight Russia. So they're asking why our Prime Minister is doing everything that he possibly can to put us at war with Russia. The British people know in their hearts that there's not enough soldiers properly to guard Buckingham Palace, and you're planning to send 30,000 of them into harm's way in the Ukraine when the Russians have told you that if you do it, it will be an act of war, you will be a belligerent, and your forces will be attacked. You see, they're our forces, not yours. They are our sons and brothers and fathers that are in the British armed forces. Do you think we're going to stay quiet about that? Do you think we're going to allow you to conscript our young people, either through withholding benefits if they don't join the army? I'm not making this up. That's exactly what they are floating now. Or by all-out conscription of our young people. Certainly you will not be able to even dream of sending 30,000. We've only got 30,000 into harm's way in Ukraine without some form or other of conscription. Do you think we're going to go quietly into that good night? Do you think we're going to allow you to keep people off ballot papers, to find any trick or device that you can to keep people off television, to keep people off the air? What do you think the British people are? We stood alone in 1940 and 41 against this kind of thing. Mr. Benn was on the roof of where he was born, now Millbank, actually working the searchlights to illuminate the Nazi bombers as they came over London on their blitz, which destroyed so much of the East End of London, so much of the Port of London, so much of Coventry, so much of the West Midlands, so much of Clydebank, where Mr. Benn's grandmother came from. Do you think that we're afraid of you, Keir Starmer? We are the people that stood up to Adolf Hitler, for a time entirely alone. We are the people that played our part in liberating the world from Hitler fascism. Do you think we are afraid of you, you grinning nincompoop? Do you think that you cut any kind of a jib with us? We despise you. The mass of the British people utterly despise you. And if the Labour Party had any sense, they'd have you out already. Now, the big enchilada has hoved into view. I mean, the B-2 bombers sitting on the tarmac in Diegogarcia, within range of the missile capability of the Islamic Republic of Iran. The B-52s are parked neatly in a row in Qatar, which will no longer exist if you use them against the Islamic Republic of Iran. Qatar, a petrol station with a flag, will no longer be a petrol station, and it will have no flag. And neither will any of the oil and gas infrastructure amongst your allies in the satrapies of the Persian Gulf continue to exist. And the Straits of Hormuz will be closed in an instant, and you will not be able to get oil at $500 a gallon. The Western economy will grind completely to a halt. Let's see what the public in Western countries think of that madcap adventurism. Now, some people say that Trump won't do it because only a madman would do such a thing. Really? only a madman would do such a thing. Well, he might do it. I personally think he will not. I personally think he would be well advised to accept Russia's offer to act as a mediator between the United States and Iran so that the world can be spared at least this iteration of World War III. You can let me know over the course of this evening what you think of that. I want to close on Greenland. Now, as I've said before, it's very controversial. A lot of people don't like me saying it. But my reaction to Trump threatening to invade Denmark is laughter. Not laughter because I don't think he will do it. Personally, I think he is going to do it. Not laughter because I think the 5,000 residents of Greenland deserve to choose their own future, self-determination and all that. Not laughter because I hate Danish people. I love Danish people. We get regular viewers and donations from people in Denmark watching this. No, it's laughter because Denmark has been the tiniest trumpet in support of Western imperial policies for longer and louder than any other part of Scandinavia. And that is saying something. The way in which, even whilst the United States is threatening to invade them, their leaders are still calling out daily, Russia, Russia, Russia. It's funny to me. It's funny because when a slave willfully, willingly, voluntarily acts like a slave, what complaint can they have when the slave owner wants to exercise, tender hearts look away now, the droit de seigneur? Because that's what Trump is doing here. He's saying, you are my house slave. I have decided I'm taking your territory. And because you are my house slave, you are going to have to accept it. Even more controversially, and we've got even more viewers in Canada, and we regularly receive donations in Canadian dollars, and I'm deeply grateful for that. Canada has been an even more supine, obeisant slave than Denmark. Canada has been more Catholic than the Pope, more royal than the King, though they're now asking the King of England to come to their aid. They didn't have much time for him recently. They were going to be a republic, but now they're begging King Charles to save them. My God, God help you if you're relying on King Charles to save you. But the Canadians are unnerved, completely unnerved. The horses have been frightened. Underneath the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the Mounties, their horses are frightened because Donald Trump is making it very clear things are going to change between the United States and Canada. And he wants Canada as the 51st state of the Union. I laugh at it. I laugh at it because Canada, with its governments of right and so-called left, thoroughly deserve this treatment. If you have no self-respect, why should anybody else respect you? When they arrested the daughter of the founder and owner of Huawei on American orders and kept her under house arrest for 2 whole years, they showed just what kind of slaves they are. And again, I make the point, if you're willing to be a slave, don't complain when the slave owner kicks you around a bit. That's the relationship that exists between owners and slaves, especially ones that have volunteered for the fate. It is the mother of all talk shows. Stay tuned.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special announcement. A big thank you to all our wonderful listeners, as the Mother of All Talk Shows podcast is now one of the most listened to political podcasts in the entire world. We are the #1 English-speaking political podcast in the Middle East, and in the last year alone have charted in the top 10 in podcast land in Pakistan, Russia, and China. Like, rate, and subscribe to the MOATS podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcasts to be a part of the fastest rising independent news show in the world.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Should Germany be allowed to prepare for war? Yes or no? Well, it's a very mixed bag in the poll this evening. 16,609 have voted. You better get that number up or you're going to get a surprise in the results. Let me put my own cards on the table. I said at the time, and I'm still saying now, Germany should never have been allowed to reunify. And the eastern part of Germany should never have been allowed to become a part of NATO. That is, after all, what the American president, George Bush Sr., promised to Gorbachev when he agreed to vacate eastern Germany and bring down that wall. The idea that Germany should be allowed to become a Fourth Reich, a superpower on the European mainland, doesn't just fly in the face of everything that we know of the last century. Do you know that Germany invaded France 3 times in 70 years? In 1870 to crush the Paris Commune, in 1914-18 in the First World War, and of course, famously in 1940 when the French folded like a cheap deck chair in just 6 weeks. The idea that we should allow Germany to arm and rearm and bankrupt its economy to become effectively a new Prussian militaristic state is so insane to me, I can't believe anyone supports it. Certainly Margaret Thatcher didn't. It's the only thing she ever agreed with me. She told me, and the only time she ever personally spoke to me, she said, I rather agreed with that, when I said exactly what I just said to you more than 30 years ago. So I'm asking you in this poll, should Germany be allowed to prepare for war? You can vote on Telegram, t.me/George Galloway. You can vote on my X, you can vote on YouTube community poll, and you can vote on the YouTube stream. If you're watching on the YouTube stream, please subscribe to the channel, give the show a thumbs up, and share with your colleagues, your contacts, your followers on YouTube that we are broadcasting live. If you want to call the show, it's toll-free in the United States and Canada. I think they're still separate countries. +1 844 944 3344. It's free of charge in the United Kingdom and Ireland. 0808 196 5522. And the worldwide number is 0044 203 966 2625. Now, if Tony Benn was my political father, our first guest is my political son. I love him. He's Jackson Hinkle, the one and only. They seek him there, they seek him here, they seek him everywhere. He's the Scarlet Pimpernel, and my goodness, he cuts a dash. Jackson, welcome back to the show. Been too long. Where are you now? Are you able to say? Because I saw you were in Pyongyang. You made a magnificent speech in Sana'a in Yemen, where the bombers were overhead. You're traveling the world and doing God's work. Tell us, what's in Jackson Hinkle life now?
Well, it's a great honor to be here, George. I am currently located in Moscow, Russia, safe from the Department of Homeland Security in the United States. Although I've done nothing wrong, you never know what they're going to do, because they're going up and rounding up innocent people who are simply voicing their opposition to the wars in the Middle East right now. and they're deporting them, or they're saying that this is somehow illegal. It's really crazy what's going on. But Sana'a was beautiful. Yemen was a great country to visit. It really opened my eyes to many things, and it was an honor to be there. But I would be lying if I didn't say that I don't have the same level of courage as those Yemenis, and I am happy to be out of the line of sight of American B-2 bombers and F-15s that were taken off from the USS Harry Truman and diegogarcia. Now that I'm here in Moscow.
Well, don't be shy about that. I myself have been bombed twice, and I'm ready to tell anyone there can be no more terrifying experience than literally to be pressing your nose into the ground, hoping that your profile is sufficiently slim that you're not going to be struck by the shards of red-hot steel that fly around. So I'm very glad that you're back and safe. Let's start with what's happening in the United States. You alluded to it. They are literally rounding people up. It's a kind of fascism. People are being told to self-deport if they know that their social media contains criticisms of Israel. They should self-deport. And if they don't, they'll be huckled in the street by masked men. Lots of masked men. Even if they are a little girl from Turkey, from Tufts University, surrounded by men whose faces she could not see, who produced no documentation, who handcuffed her and took her away. I was waiting for the shot in the back of her head. I thought it was a scene from Syria, from ISIS, Al-Qaeda controlled Syria. What on earth is happening in what used to call itself the land of the free?
It's the craziest thing I've ever seen. It's really a complete attack on free speech by the so-called pro-free speech, Make America Great Again movement. And I will say that there's many within the MAGA movement who are opposed to what's happening. The genuine organic roots of the MAGA movement are opposed to what's happening. But there's so many fakes and fraudsters. And then, of course, at the top, you have someone who is the least MAGA of all, Donald Trump and the Kushners and all these ilk who are really, there couldn't be further from the embodiment of what the true spirit of MAGA is. And the most important thing, as Ron Paul always says, is we have to protect free speech. The last speech that Ron Paul gave on the U.S. House floor was about the need to protect free speech. And now we see today just how important that is. I'll say, just briefly, it's baffling to me and disgusting that our government is deporting people, lawful residents, even green card holders, over their opinions against Israel and in support of the resistance. Because it was the United States who had a very similar founding. My ancestors came to America on the Mayflower. They fought in the American Revolution. And the American revolutionaries were called terrorists. They took civilian hostages. They were fighting for their freedom against an asymmetric power, a foreign aggressor. They were fighting for freedom of movement so they could develop further west. And they were fighting for what they saw as their basic freedoms. And if you look at the struggle in Gaza today, it's really the exact same, except it's much worse. The asymmetric power is far more gruesome. So I don't see how any American could oppose the resistance of the Palestinians and those in the axes of resistance.
Well, I mean, it's called the First Amendment for a reason, isn't it? Because without that First Amendment, no other freedoms can exist. If you don't have freedom of speech, how can you possibly have a democracy? And that was the shtick of the America First movement when Joe Biden and Kamala Harris were imposed, and their big tech bro allies were throttling the life of people like you and me and hundreds of thousands of others, anyone with a different point of view, whether on mass medication or on foreign wars. If you stop people from freely speaking, how do you know that you've missed, therefore, the answer that you needed, the answer that we needed to hear? That's what John Stuart Mill said about liberty. It's not that those who are being denied freedom of speech are going to always be right. They may overwhelmingly always be wrong, but one time they may be right, and we will not have heard that what was right, that which was right, because it was suppressed. I mean, I'm looking at Cornell University, I'm looking at Tufts, I'm looking all over Columbia. Columbia is like a reign of terror, actually, at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the crazy thing is these students didn't even commit their so-called crimes when Trump was in office. They committed their alleged crimes and violations of the norms of the Trump administration during the Biden administration. So it's like the whole thing is insane. I don't understand how you can be prosecuting people for something that you didn't even have any oversight on. He wasn't in office. It wasn't his policy that they were protesting. They were protesting Joe Biden. And by now going after these protesters, Donald Trump is defending Joe Biden. He's defending Joe Biden's legacy. Donald Trump said that Joe Biden shouldn't bomb Yemen. Now Trump is bombing Yemen, again defending Joe Biden's legacy and continuing it. And same thing with Iran. Now you have Donald Trump, who just a few weeks before the election said, you know, I don't want Iran to get a nuclear weapon, but we can't be bombing them. We can't bomb them. This is a horrible idea. Now, B-2 bombers at diegogarcia with the in-air refueling planes, and they're having all these threats now about going in and bombing Iran. It's the most insane and hypocritical thing I've ever seen.
Do you think he's going to do that, Jackson, or is this the traditional art of the deal bluster?
I sure hope it's the art of the deal. I do think it is the art of the deal. I don't think he's, and I really don't think he's that stupid. And the main reason why I say that, and I think it's the little known secret that everyone secretly does know and they just don't want to say, is that if the U.S. gets into a war with Iran, violates Iranian sovereignty in a very big way on Iranian soil, then you will have trillions and trillions of dollars lost in not just the U.S. economy, but the global economy. Of course, the U.S. will be hit the hardest because they'll be the target with all of their infrastructure, ports, U.S. military assets, so on and so forth in the region that are right on Iran's doorstep. So I think if Trump is looking at this strictly as a businessman, he would be very, 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 very stupid even then to start a war with Iran.
Well, he doesn't even have John Bolton to blame anymore. I mean, it became a trope. Good czar, bad advisors. And if only Trump hadn't had John Bolton, he wouldn't have made some of the mistakes he made in his first term. But, I mean, who is it that's encouraging him to do such an insane thing, if indeed he's going to do it?
Well, I don't think it's Elon Musk, because Elon Musk has posted memes about how we have all these U.S. military bases surrounding Iran, and Iran's not the one that's provoking the U.S., it's the other way around. I would imagine that it's the likes of Marco Rubio, although he doesn't really have a whole lot of power right now. He's complaining about how he has no power. He's being sent off to the Caribbean, to Jamaica, and even then he's being, shown up by Cuban doctors who are saying, no, we're not going to leave Jamaica when you tell us to, Marco Rubio. I think it's mostly really just the Israel lobby. I don't think there's much of an ideological, overarching ideological strategy here. I do honestly believe that you have Miriam Adelson gave Trump $100 million Sheldon Adelson gave Trump $100 million before he passed. You have the whole rest of the Israel lobby that's very powerful. Trump clearly has a good working relationship with Netanyahu as of right now. And I think this is the thing that Israel wants more than anything else, is to either go to war with Iran or to bring about the end of the Islamic Republic of Iran in a slow fashion, bit by bit, by forcing them into some horrible, renegotiated Iran deal, which will strip them of all their power.
I can't let you go without testing your views on Greenland and Canada. I don't know if you heard my monologue, but it's enough to make a horse laugh for me. The most supine satraps of the American empire, Denmark and Canada, are currently threatened by annexation from their overlord. As Oscar Wilde said on the death scene in Little Nell by Charles Dickens, you'd have to have a heart of stone not to laugh.
Well, I don't really have any problem with them taking Greenland because it's already basically ours. And some people are saying, oh, what about the threat against Russia and in the north? And it's like, well, that's already ours, basically. We could do whatever we want there. And Russia has plenty of territory in the north at their disposal. But as for Canada, I 100% support taking Canada. I don't really know what his vision is here, but I think it would be a beautiful vision if the U.S. fully liberated Canada. We could drive cyber trucks up there and liberate it in cyber truck convoys or something. And the main reason for this is Canada has gone to war against the U.S. several times. There's been rumors that a lot of the assassinations of U.S. presidents came in, British banking cartel plots out of Canada. And also, I love the idea of creating a land bridge with Russia through Canada. And this gets us one step closer.
Brilliant. Jackson Hinkle, you're a superstar. Stay safe. Stay in Moscow. Don't go back to the United States in the current climate. That's my advice to you, son. Thanks for being with us on the mother of all talk shows. Wow, what a man. Should Germany be allowed to prepare for war? That's the poll this evening. You can vote on Telegram, t.me/George Galloway, on X, on the YouTube community poll, and on the YouTube stream. Well, the poll's rocketing up now. Maybe we'll get a representative result by the end. Your calls coming next, starting in Florida, in Mar-a-Lago land. Why not? Who wouldn't on this cold day? This is the mother of all talk shows. Stay tuned. I've got to tell you, most British people couldn't point out Ukraine or Syria on the map. This is a symptom of the Western decline. So I wouldn't, in other words, beat up the American public uniquely for that. This is a common characteristic. 4 million people watched MOATS. That's a truly astounding number of people. I mean, astounding. But it's still a tiny number compared to the population even of the United Kingdom, never mind the United States, never mind both of them together, and the rest of the English-speaking world, and never mind the rest of the non-English-speaking world. So we have to keep in perspective. We have more people who know more than we have ever had before. But we have a huge number of people who, I'm sorry to say, are mere sheep, who give life's blood if necessary, who give their sustenance financially, and who bray when asked, and dutifully get on board the truck taking them to the abattoir. But it seems to me, given the unique horror of 9/11, the impact of 9/11 on the American psyche, that the very organization that the US government says carried out the 9/11 mass murder of thousands of American citizens is the same Al-Qaeda that American weapons, money, diplomatic cover, and endless propaganda was used to put into power in Damascus. Now, as a contradiction, that is as sharp as it's possible to get as a contradiction. And we must do more to proselytize for that.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Should Germany be allowed to prepare for war? Yes or no? It's a binary question. Have your say on our poll this evening. Meanwhile, on the line from Florida is Eve on Iran and the US. Go ahead, Eve.
Hello. Thank you for having me on your show.
Welcome.
The first point I would like to make is that Ukraine and Iran are now, in my opinion, completely intertwined. As you recall, President Trump named two special envoys, Mr. General Kellogg, I believe, for Russia, and Mr. Witkoff for the Middle East. Mr. Witkoff is a Zionist, he's intelligent, he's Jewish, and he was supposed to negotiate the release of the hostage and this kind of thing. And then one day, we hear that there is no more Mr. Kellogg, but it is going to be Mr. Witkoff also for Russia. And then we hear that everything goes well and that they spend hours together with various people in Russia. And then we had this interview with Tucker Carlson, and Mr. Witkoff was unable to name the four oblasts that Russia wanted. He knew that there were four. He could name two, but he could not name, I believe, Zaporozhye and Kherson. He could name Lysychansk and Donetsk, but he could not. So my conclusion is that this intelligent man spent a lot of time talking about many other things than Ukraine proper. Like I said last time, about Zaporozhye, but I think that the talk was about, we don't care about those four provinces if you can be neutral in the conflicts that we want to have against Iran. I think that's which brings us to Iran. And about Iran, I must say that I'm not very satisfied with the coverage that we have, because I think the position of Iran is very intelligent, and they don't have too many positions. And because for them, they have different options. The first option is that they don't have anything. So they are like Libya, they will be destroyed. The second option is they have only the missile, but they don't have any radioactive uranium kind of stuff. Well, America would do exactly the same. They would ask for the dismantlement of those missiles that they don't want to dismantle. The third position is the one they have. They have the missile and a little bit of nuclear material, which they can negotiate with the U.S. indirectly, but they can reduce that. And then they could have also the bomb, like 50 bombs. But that would be the good excuse for the U.S. to go after, and they would not even give advance notice. They would just say, we always said this and this and this, and they may have more support if that was the case. So the question is not, like Scott Ritter say, the right question is not in an existential fight between the U.S. and Iran. The U.S. will win all the time, and so on. This is true. Everybody knows that. But the problem is that can Israel survive if, for instance, America nuke Iran? That's the first question. And the second question is, do Iran have some strong backup with Pakistan or Russia if they are attacked by a nuclear weapon? And that's where the point I wanted to make.
Well, that's why Putin this week said that any attack on Iran's nuclear facilities would be a catastrophe for the region. Now, you can read that two ways. Presumably it was written so it could be read two ways. He could have meant it will technically be a catastrophe for the region because the nuclear fallout will go everywhere and anywhere, and no place or person will be safe from it. Or he could have meant that it will inevitably create conditions of all-out warfare that will ineluctably draw in the superpowers. Now, I'm not saying that Russia, and certainly not China, will go to war with the US over Iran. I personally don't think that they will. In Russia's case, they have their hands full in their own near abroad. In China's case, they are nowhere near that level of political boldness in the world. They may be the world's biggest economy, at least very soon. They certainly are the world's biggest manufacturing economy. They certainly have the world's biggest army, employing the largest number of people of any organization on earth. But they are not anywhere near the levels of proactivity on the international scene to do that. But Russia has furbished Iran with the very best of anti-aircraft capability, as good as defends Moscow itself. And they undoubtedly have electronically warfare capacity now in Iran that will make it difficult for an all-out aerial attack on Iran. I think Iran will be on its own, but I don't say that that is a small thing, because I personally believe that Iran is a very formidable military foe. I think its ballistic missile capability is enormous and unrevealed. We've seen only the ankles of what Iran has at its disposal. The rest of the body is pretty spectacular, in my view. Iran has the drone technology that has people queuing up to buy it. So Iran can proliferate this war that Donald Trump might launch across all of the region and further beyond. They could hit Diegogarcia itself, and they would have every right legally to do so tonight, because it's abundantly clear that the United States is officially threatening them with bombardment under the United Nations and laws of war. The preemptive strike against someone who's openly declaring and arming up to attack you, Iran would have every legal right to attack Diegogarcia this evening as a preemptive strike. So that's before you talk about the economic catastrophe that this would produce, and which I tried to give some glimpse of in my opening remarks. Thanks, Eve, in Florida this time. Now, you can leave comments on YouTube if you're watching there. Scan the QR code now, leave a comment on the YouTube stream, and I'll try and read them out. 72 Marshflower 15 says, Hitler loved the Ukraine region and visited often. Sound familiar? And Crowhawk says, once upon a time, anti-Semite meant someone who didn't like Jews. Now it means a decent human being with a functioning moral compass. And Citrus 1 says, Germany is a sovereign nation. Who is going to tell nations if they can prepare for war or not? Well, the rest of us that lost 100 million people in the lifetime of some people watching this show tonight. That's who, if we had the guts to do it, and if we weren't actually willing them on to do it. R. Satur says Germany has nothing that Russia needs. Not oil, not gas, not resources, and definitely not land. And Stratacat 2000 says Russia has issued warnings about the potential consequences if the United States were to attack Iran, particularly targeting its nuclear infrastructure. Let's go to Dublin. Who wouldn't want to? Where Declan is on the line. Go ahead, Declan. What do you want to say?
Right, George. I want to make 2 points. The first one is about Congressman Thomas Massey from the state of Virginia in the USA. Now, Congressman Massey is a real, Donald Trump Republican, take the guns from his dead hands, cold dead hands, the right to life, etc., etc. Except for one small little detail. He is the only member of Congress, of the lower or upper houses in America, who does not vote the Netanyahu line all the time. He's the only guy, and he's the only guy who doesn't have an AIPAC minder. The AIPAC is told, just go away, I'm a libertarian. And for that, according to Donald Trump, has made it his mission to get rid of Thomas Massey, because America cannot be safe when there's one small voice from Kentucky. The way the Chinese say is you kill the Kentucky chicken and you scare the monkeys. Now, if we jump to this side of the Atlantic, in Germany, they're currently deporting 2 Irish people, 1 Pole and a Yank, because they're Hamas supporters. Now, as you probably know about me, I link Hamas with the Muslim Brotherhood, and therefore I've no time for the Muslim Brotherhood. Now, with the Yank, he's now... so he did something innocuous. He wore a T-shirt or whatever. But he is, as a result, banned from all 39 members of Schengen because he offended German sensibilities. And I just want to finish with one more thing our German friends have done. There's this Ukrainian guy, Kirill Molchanov, who took refuge in Russia, and he's been harping on for ages about all the skullduggery Ukraine gets up to. And the Germans offered to give him a Peace Prize or whatever in Berlin, so they gave him a ticket. The Germans organised the ticket via Poland, and because Mr. Molchanov had accepted many awards in the European Union, he jumped on the plane, landed in Poland, and was whisked off to Zelensky's Ukraine, where he now sits in a prison where probably Gonzalo Lira was sitting not so long ago. So all of these things add up to, you may remember Operation Condor, when the CIA were running riot in America, throwing people out of planes and all the rest of it. And I think that's where we are, or that's where we're going.
Well, I didn't know the background story to the gentleman that you mentioned, but I know that he is in the kind of dungeon that poor old Gonzalo Lira perished in. And the fact that it was German and Polish perfidy that put him there, I'm afraid, sadly, does not surprise me. Declan, always a pleasure to hear your brogue. A big thanks, by the way, to everyone who donated this week on the MOATS.tv website. The best of them: Malcolm Dix, Ali Korai, Tanim Chaudhry, and Tony Dillon. Please be a MOATS donor tonight. Give what you can to support the show. It's really easy. You just go to MOATS.tv website and click. It's the simplest way that you can support this show, which, if you don't support it, will not exist. That's the long and the short of it. Let's take one more call before the break. Zaid in Watford on Palestine, Egypt. Go ahead, Zaid.
Good evening, George, and thank you very much for taking my call. Firstly, I want to apologize in my previous call about Ukraine. I hope I didn't offend you. It wasn't my intention at all.
You're most welcome. Go ahead.
No problem. Thank you. Two issues I wanted to raise. Firstly, the massive Egyptian army buildup in the Sinai desert on the border with Gaza. That's been talked about in the Arab media, but not at all in the Western media, I've noticed. And the other issue was a question I would have loved you to have asked Scott Ritter. Now, all the focus is on Iran's nuclear weapons capability or development, but nothing has been talked about Iran's existing chemical and biological weapons capability, which was back from the late 80s, as you remember, with the attack on Halabja in the north of Iraq, which was at the time, as I'm sure you know, was attributed to Saddam.
Blamed on Iran,
weapons.
yeah.
But in fact, in reality, it was actually chemical weapons were being used by both sides. It was Iran that first attacked with their chemical weapons, and then Saddam retaliated equally with chemical weapons. So Iran, from the late 80s, has had chemical weapons, and 30 years to date to build up that stockpile. And I think Israel will be, if Israel is terrified of anything, is being hit with chemical weapons, because you know how the most thing that Jews are paranoid about is being gassed to death.
Well, you're right to raise that point, and you're right also to say that nobody else is, including me. I suppose we've all become used to the nuclear plane and have forgotten about the other kinds of weapons of mass destruction. Of course, the first people to use chemical weapons in the Middle East were us, Winston Churchill to be precise, who dropped chemical weapons from Royal Air Force planes as Colonial Secretary in the 1920s on what were then described as rebel northern tribesmen. Nowadays, we'd call them Kurds, the very Kurds that were subject to the same kind of chemical attack at Halabja. So, Zaid, your call is probably the last one for this part of the show, because we're about to take a break. But let me first make a plug for our podcast. We have retained our spot in the top 40 in Russia, which is the first time we've been 2 consecutive weeks in the top 40 in Russia. We are in the UK charts again, the top 100. When you think how many podcasts there are in Britain from the BBC downwards or upwards, you'll realise that it's quite an achievement. We're really big in Malaysia, Morocco and Egypt this week, in all cases in the top 5. You can download the MOATS podcast by scanning the QR code on your screen now. And of course you can listen on the website moats.tv when you go to leave your donation. If you do listen to the podcast, please review it and rate it too, so it helps us to grow. Should Germany be allowed to prepare for war? 20,630 people have voted, and Telegram, X, YouTube community poll and the YouTube stream are the places to cast your vote. Right after the break, we have a young rising star, Yusuf Omar, co-founder of Scene TV and Scene Palestine. You'll like him, I promise. Stay tuned.
The airwaves. This savannah is a rigid dichotomy of fact and fiction. As Fisher says, the Twitter sphere where the slightest misjudgment can spell being cancelled. One species rules over the airwaves through its ability to adapt and survive in even the harshest environments. The George Galloway. the top cat in these parts. It is mostly active on Sunday evenings in Britain and mid-afternoon in the United States. It seldom roars during the day. Most notable for its wide variety of headdress, it protects these parts from the mainstream media. You can catch this fine specimen on the mother of all talk shows. Don't pick a fight with it. They've been known to bite back.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Should Germany be allowed to prepare for war, yes or no? I would have thought it was the most self-evident question, but it is not. So get voting on the poll. 20,901 of you have so far voted. Now, Yusuf Omar, co-founder of Scene TV and Scene Palestine, is, for his youth, a very distinguished figure indeed. He has 8 million followers on social media. He's been a war correspondent. He is a multiple award winner. It's just that I haven't met him yet, and I'm privileged to do so right now. Yusuf, you're down under, so you've gotten up very early to be with us, though you look fabulous, I must say, for this time of the morning. Thanks for joining us. Tell us a bit more, well, before we start, about Scene TV and Scene Palestine.
Appreciate the introduction, mate. And I just want to say, I mean, you've been such a great inspiration to so many young storytellers for many years. I actually came, as you mentioned in the introduction, from a very traditional media background. I was at CNN International. I was a war correspondent in Syria, Congo, Sudan, Egypt, all over the world. And we basically realized that the media lacked so much diversity that they were just incapable of telling stories that were truly accurate and represented our global and interconnected world. My co-founder and I quit our jobs. We traveled around the world. We trained up 20,000 people in 140 countries how to tell stories with their mobile phones. We started to develop little apps that guide you through the storytelling process, like a AI journalist that helps you self-interview. And today we're able to curate these incredible stories into a series of different social media shows, documentaries, television products. But think about it like a decentralized network of mojos, mobile journalists all over the world, with a team of 40 professional journalists full-time who are editing, verifying, fact-checking, and putting these stories out to the world.
I didn't catch all of that. I hope the audience did, because it was absolutely fascinating. It is an idea that if I was 20 years younger, I would have done myself, and often get asked to do so, to teach people how to tell stories and how to communicate them. We are now in a revolutionary era where anyone can tell a story. When I began in politics, you had to have the favour, or at least not the animosity, of the tiny handful of people who controlled the means of disseminating stories. But so many people are not really able to grasp the full possibilities of that revolutionary period that we are now in. So full marks to you for doing that. We were listening, don't ask why, to a guy called Andrew Marr on a local London radio station called LBC earlier before the show. We were trapped, we couldn't get out of it. And I remarked to my colleague that this is literally wall-to-wall propaganda. Every minute and every word of this broadcast has been anything but journalism. Anything but what we once knew as broadcast journalism. It was absolutely blatant, brazen propaganda, and the audience desert such things in their numbers. They walk away from it, as all of their numbers show. There are far more people watching you and I right now than were listening to Andrew Marr on LBC, and by the end of the week, it'll be millions more. And it wasn't always thus, Yusuf. I was recalling 20 years ago, in the run-up to the Iraq War, I was on national television virtually every day. News night, question time, 6 o'clock news, 10 o'clock news, sometimes 3 in one evening. 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, Channel 4 news, then off to news night in the evening. In those 20 years, no pretense is now made that the public deserve a proper debate, a balanced set of speakers and narratives so that they can make up their mind. Where did it all go wrong?
At its core, I think sometimes people believe that media organizations are fed a narrative. And sometimes that is the case, right? There's a top-down story that's dictated. But what's even more worrying to me, George, is in the newsrooms that I've worked in, the journalists, who by their very nature are inherently pretty critical individuals, right? They try to lean on the side of accuracy and fact-checking. They actually believe the things that they propagate. And that, for me, is the really terrifying part. And the question is, well, why do they believe that? And if I look back at my time, for example, at CNN International, I was at the London office in 2016. There were 200 editorial staff. I was the only one that I know of that identified as Muslim. Can you imagine, in a city like London, to have one person who identifies as Muslim, yet the Middle East might make up 20 to 30% of your overall news broadcast? So much so that they would come to me and say, hey, Yusuf, what do you think your opinion is on this story or that story? I'm like, I don't know. Go and ask an expert in the matter. So I think this critical lack of diversity in their news organizations means that they have such a skewed representation of reality. And this manifested in so many drastic ways in 2016 alone, right? We had the Trump election, which no traditional media anticipated, right? The average journalist was significantly more wealthy, educated, and left-leaning the average American in the US. Same thing in the UK. No, for the most part, most of the traditional media didn't think Brexit was going to happen. They were speaking to London, and they were speaking to a very small base of people, and they weren't speaking to the broader population. And all the while, user-generated content, people with mobile phones, was taking off in a really significant way. But traditional media saw this as a threat because, to your point, for the longest of time, they had been the sole arbiters of truth. They'd held on to this monopoly in the ability to tell stories. And now that monopoly was being questioned. I mean, it was so bad. We once gave a speech. This was back in 2016. At a conference, and I spoke about this idea. I said, citizens can tell their own stories and journalists can fact check and verify it. And Nick Robinson, the political editor at the BBC at the time, he got up on stage in front of everybody. I was giving a speech and he said, what you're doing isn't journalism. What you're doing isn't news. I would rather die than do what you do, but it isn't journalism. Journalism is finding things out. And how badly have those comments aged? I mean, jump forward to today, George, and I would argue that the biggest stories of our time are brought to you by people on the ground with mobile devices. And that trajectory is only going to continue.
Well, it's funny, I mentioned apropos nothing Andrew Marr earlier, but when he said what you just said, and which I believe actually, I agree with you, it's worse than that they're doing what they're ordered to do. It's that they really actually believe it. As Chomsky said to Andrew Marr, I believe that you believe it, but if you didn't believe it, you would not be sitting in this chair. And of course, subliminally at the back of their mind, all these journalists know that if they were to buck the prevailing orthodoxy in any serious way, they would no longer be sitting in those chairs. So they do believe it. But they also know that if they didn't believe it, they would not be there. But we have reached rock bottom, as you can see in the stats, for example, of under 30-year-olds who watch television news is now fewer than watch SpongeBob SquarePants. The number of people who get their news from a whole portfolio of different podcasts and alternative shows like this one, like yours, is ballooning. I mean, our first episode of MOATS was seen by several 100,000 people. And this is not even the 500th, and yet this will be seen by more than 4 million people. I passed a message to my old colleagues at a local radio station, I'll not name it, when they asked me how it was going. I said, well, how about if I told you that my audience is 800 times bigger than it was when I worked with you? So the question then is, we're teaching all these people, we're, kind of you to say, inspiring all these people to do it for themselves. They are getting an audience. The legacy media, therefore, is a dead duck. I mean, the newspapers now are hardly worth printing, but soon LBC and television stations, other than the BBC, that are state-funded, it won't be worth their while turning up, will it?
It's fantastic. It is fantastic. Their days are numbered. The writing is on the wall, and they can see it coming. I mean, take the BBC, for example. For the longest of time, they have maintained somewhat of a reputation of being a reputable news source. Jump forward to October 7th and soon after, where they call pro-Palestinian protesters on the streets of London pro-Hamas protesters. And people think that this is a slip of the tongue, or it happens by accident. You know as well as I do, having worked in and with these organizations, every word is so calculated. It's carefully drafted. There is no errors when making such drastic statements. I think that they've represented the hypocrisy and the biases that they've always had, but it's just more obvious than ever before. And they're suffering because of it. Audiences are running away and they're running to new platforms. The challenge becomes when their revenue streams and their business models that otherwise would be terribly unsustainable are being artificially propped up. So, for example, I live here in Australia. I'm joining you from Australia today. Rupert Murdoch's empire owns the vast majority of media publishing in this country. And they were somehow able to lobby, to bully the platforms as large as Meta into giving them millions and millions of dollars. And if they didn't, the Australian government would effectively throw Meta out of the country. So there's crazy deals were done. And what those deals have done is that they've held up the legacy. They've kept these big giants in place who otherwise wouldn't financially be able to sustain themselves. We see the same thing all over the world. And I think as long as people don't support independent media like you, and I see you calling out on this show, hey, support this show if you want to see more voices like this. If we don't see that shift, it's going to be really difficult to sustain these new media products.
Yeah, let's talk about Palestine then, Yusuf, because there is no issue where the vast gulf between what the viewers of alternative media outlets are seeing and what the general public that are still watching the fading, but nonetheless still extant mainstream media. There is no issue where it is more black and white. So, for example, I talked earlier about a baby with no head being held aloft from the Jabalia camp today, a camp I know well, being held aloft by a family member. That will have been seen by only the people on the alternative media outlets, and not even all of theirs. Some of us can no longer bear to look at such things, but we all know that they are happening. But the policymakers, the legislators, the members of parliament seem to be locked in I'd call it a conspiracy myself, a conspiracy of looking the other way at what is really happening in Palestine. And I personally have no explanation for it. I don't know why all these clever people that you say exist in newsrooms, and I agree with you, they are. They're all university-educated people. They know, they must know, that we are all watching a completely different picture. Why are they, together with the legislators, the political class, the political media class, why are they so locked in an alternative universe? And how long do they think they can sustain that?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much happening here. On one side, you're incredibly frustrated. You're like, how the hell can you not see the same stuff that I'm seeing online? On the other side, we're in completely separate social media echo chambers. We're seeing a feed of babies being pulled from the rubble, beheaded. They're seeing often propaganda. They're in two different worlds. I think this goes back so far, as you know, George. I mean, this goes back through 50 years of dehumanization and demonization of the Arab population, where we view them through the perspective of security and counterterrorism, right? And within that, you're believing this Israeli line of, well, we're just going for Hamas, and they happen to be hiding behind these babies. So I think they're trapped in this worldview, but they're so disconnected, not just from the realities on the ground and what we're seeing demonstrates to us from citizens, but they're also disconnected with the public sentiment shift that is happening at a scale like we've never seen before. I mean, the latest Gallup studies came out from the US to show, by and large, Gen Z and American youth are more sympathetic to the Palestinian liberation struggle than they are to Israel. This is a major shift. Israel are in significant trouble. The entire narrative has been unbuckled, and it's a really, really, really difficult one to defend. So what they find themselves in a position is that they can't really defend the occupation. They can't really defend apartheid. So now they've got no choice but to try and shut down the other story, shut down alternative media, shut down citizen stories. And you're seeing that with the Mahmoud Khalils of the world being arrested, but you're also seeing that with social media platforms starting to shadow ban and censor a lot of the content. We've experienced it. I'm sure you've experienced it on some of the stories that you've published. There's been verified reports from within Meta of this happening. So it seems to me like, yes, I don't know why these journalists are somewhat aware but not actioning. Maybe there is a disconnect where they don't quite realize that our view is not the minority, it's actually the majority. Remember, I think often people mistake the pro-Palestinian position as being like this fringe movement, and they forget that the majority of the world population are on this side of history.
So they are, of course, I mean, we're in a bit of a golden age at the moment, but before we were not, and later we may not be. Where we've been set free. I mean, our views on Facebook, for example, were as low as 3,000 to 4,000, and now they are 100,000 or 200,000. So it's like it's been unlocked, and we are racking up record numbers. But the situation for us, as for you, is that we are in their hands. If they decided they didn't like our interview this evening, they could simply take it down, and it would be as if it never happened. At least for a time, we'd find ways, of course, but they're not doing that for a variety of reasons. Not because they love freedom, probably they love the numbers, and there's a commercial logic, but also they thought that the Trump era would be less forgiving of media censorship and so on. How wrong they've proved to be on that. But what can we do about the fact that they still control? I mean, in the past they controlled all the papers and the TV stations. Now they still control the platforms on which we must stand if we're to be seen and heard.
We are being held hostage by algorithms that we have no control over, and we are a victim of our inability to own distribution or the pipes or channels that access audiences. While we acknowledged earlier that you no longer need that big satellite truck and all that infrastructure to be able to share your story, you still do need these social media platforms. I've got three things to say to that, George. The first thing I'd say is decentralization. Yes, it is easy to close down the mother of all talk shows as a singular channel, or seeing TV as a singular channel. It is much, much more difficult to close down thousands, hundreds of thousands of people all putting out the same messages at the same time. So we need to create vehicles that effectively decentralize our narratives so that lots of people are able to put them out on their personal social media accounts. What does that mean? That means if one of your audience are watching this show right now, other than financially supporting or subscribing, what you can do is you could be downloading it and cutting little clips and uploading that onto your own socials, getting it out into the world in as many different directions as possible. It's hard to shut down lots of people at the same time. The second thing I'd say is we've got to start creating direct connections with audiences. So if we're able to connect with somebody via email, via WhatsApp, via a phone number, that's a far more meaningful connection. We then don't rely on an algorithm that might change our relationship. That might mean that you don't see me tomorrow. So having direct relationships with large audiences is becoming very, very important. And I think the third and most important thing is we need to start building our own distribution platforms. Like if you look at the collective capital that is available, it is immense, it is significant. If we're tired of being bullied by these tech giants, then let's build our own equivalents. But that involves unity, that involves coming together cohesively around a common strategy. But that really is the only long-term play here. And there is a unique window in which to do this, George. If you look at the internet, Web 1 was monopolized. Web 2 was monopolized. When I say Web 1, I mean the AOLs and the forums of the world. When I say Web 2, I mean Meta and these kinds of platforms. Web 3 is emerging. And many people talk about it in many different ways. I talk about it through the perspective of a fundamental shift where we're actually moving from mobile devices to wearable technology. I've been wearing cameras and computers on my face for about 10 years now. And some of them look as small as the glasses that you're wearing, but I overlay my experience of the internet onto my world. Long story short, George, that's a disruptive shift in technology. And with that shift, there are going to be new players that are going to emerge. They're going to own distribution in that space. If we acknowledge that we missed distribution of the television owned by old white men in towers in New York and London, and if we missed distribution of mobiles and laptops owned by Zuckerberg and the like in San Francisco, there is still the opportunity to own the future of media distribution in Web 3. And I think we should start having those conversations about how we can build the muscles and the experience in order to build those platforms.
I'd love to work with you on that. Yusuf, you are a star. This has been one of the most important interviews that we have ever done. Yusuf Omar, co-founder of Scene TV and Scene Palestine. It's been a privilege talking with you. Thanks for joining us. Should Germany be allowed to prepare for war? Yes or no? You've got about 15 minutes left to get your vote in. Let me take a quick break. Then it's your calls all the way up to Gayatri and the social media roundup. Stay tuned.
You have to remember back in 2002, 2003, there was a wish by George Bush for regime change. That's what was driving him. Nothing to do with weapons of mass destruction, which of course didn't exist in Iraq. So they had to construct some sort of formula, some sort of cover story in order to persuade the British public that intervention in Iraq was right. Now, David Kelly, as an expert in weapons of mass destruction, knew that this was untrue. He knew that there were probably no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq.
That was a guy that could have brought down, the whole system.
I reckon you're chaff. You've been thrown up to divert our probing.
The Foreign Affairs Select Committee, that parliamentarian briefing, I think that was an indignity to him.
We saw it on the news, and my very first thought was shock. Oh my God, you know, this man is in the eye of the media hurricane. He should be protected by that at least.
You've got blood on your hands, Prime Minister. Are you going to resign over this?
I don't know the details of how Lord Hutton happened to be selected, but what was certainly the case is that he was the right kind of judge to use from the point of view of Downing Street and the intelligence services as well.
Of the 21 days of hearing, only one half of one day was spent on discussing the forensic aspects. That is disgusting.
We were given the Hutton report the day before it was published, but actually what happened was he went too far.
The events of 2003 were disgraceful ones in this country's history, and it's unfinished business. Those responsible for an illegal war, those responsible for the death of David Kelly, have not been brought to justice. There's been no inquest into David Kelly's death. There needs to be one. We need to make sure that those who behaved in a reprehensible way in 2003, I finally brought to book.
Now, you get that film and our earlier film, The Killings of Tony Blair, and my documentary on the rise of the far right in Britain, the rise of Oswald Mosley, fascism, and so on. All three films worth watching. You get them absolutely free if you support us on Patreon. Patreon.com/George Galloway. Please support us. You've got to support the show one way or the other through Patreon, in which case you get to chat with me on a Monday on my long train journeys. And if you can go to the website and support us that way, that's just as good. Thanks very much indeed. Let's go to Los Angeles, where Nick wants to talk about the Church of England. My goodness, that's a ball I didn't see coming. Nick, what would you like to say about the Church of England?
Hi, George. Good to speak to you. Someone I think the last couple of days, an article was penned by Jewish Voice for Labour, which I think is the faction that stood with Jeremy Corbyn.
Yes.
When he was assassinated by his colleagues.
Yes, very fine people. Yes.
Yeah, and they penned a piece, I think it was from this week, that was basically calling out the Church of England in its complicitness in this genocide in Gaza. And along those lines, obviously, included with that accusation has been the debacle of Justin Welby having to resign and their standing silence on this tragedy that we're witnessing and unfolding every single day on our television screens. Is basically, I think, is the Church of England and the monarchy lost all its relevance? It's time to call it quits, isn't it?
Well, a very good call. Thanks for it, Nick. Expecting morality from a church founded on the balls of King Henry VIII was probably always over ambitious, because that's all the Church of England was, and now is. It is as meaningless an institution in British society as it's almost possible to imagine. I mean, the Boy Scouts, the Girl Guides, both relics of the 19th century, are more relevant to British life today than the Church of England is. Its attendances are rock bottom. Its buildings are routinely sold off, sometimes as mosques, other times as luxury flats and so on. If you Google churches for sale in England, you will find hundreds of them. Their numbers are not even 2% of those who say they are Anglican Christians go to church on a Sunday, and never go to church other than weddings and funerals. And when they're there, they don't know the words of the prayers or the hymns. You can spot them. So I think that Justin Welby, a former oil executive, was just the man really to preside over their immolation as a national institution of any relevance. However, you rightly raise the fact by imputation that King Charles is the head of the Church of England, and the bishops of the Church of England have automatic seats in Parliament. Not that they do very much of any use with them. And Jewish Voice for Labour, I saw that piece, were completely correct to draw attention to the fact that Justin Welby, the Archbishop of Canterbury as was, now had to resign over his shocking failure to root out decades of child abuse in the Church of England. Justin Welby told British people, told the country, that they should not vote for Jeremy Corbyn, the leader of the Labour opposition, on moral grounds. This paragon of moral virtue, Justin Welby, one of whose sons works for Tony Blair, and now has had to resign in such scandalous circumstances, he said people should not vote for Jeremy Corbyn on moral grounds. And the shame and disgrace that is the Church of England, I think, can be traced directly back to the shameful and disgraceful conduct of its founder, the bulls of King Henry VIII. Oifa is in Dublin. She's with Mothers Against Genocide. Aoife, what would you like to say?
Hi, George. I'm not currently with them, but I follow them very closely on social media. Because in my view, that they are a group, right, that represent hundreds, if not thousands of us around the country. By their very nature, Mothers Against Genocide, we're simply in solidarity with those mothers who are losing so many of their precious children, right, in Gaza, right, in the most horrific and torturous circumstances. Now, on Mother's Day, all right, they had a vigil in front of the Dáil, right, in Dublin, and a few of them attached themselves to the gates because of an inconvenience, just to make sure that they were seen and heard by the rest of the country, and by their actual title, it was made then say the word genocide on RTE and our local mainstream media, which is now more and more in the grip of one-sided skew, as we all know. So what happened afterwards, they would have had a general agreement to leave this area at about 12 o'clock the next day, because they stayed all Mother's Day and then overnight. But no. At 5:30, they were pulled off the front entrance by a huge amount of Gardaí in a very, very rough way. And then 3 of them report back after that they had been strip searched and one of them cavity searched. Now, I don't know if that was... it was an anger in me that was activated that I can't explain, George, and I don't know what to do with. Because to cavity search a lady, and I believe she was a hijabi lady, and her hijab was taken, for her to say, right, that she was stripped down to naked, and they're told to take off her underwear, and if she asked why, it said if she didn't do it, that it would be done for her in a violent manner. I don't know. I don't believe this country that I live in has descended to such depths whereby they're actually using IDF tactics on people who would represent hundreds upon thousands of us, mothers, who, the very nature of our duties, could not be there because we are, cooking dinners, picking up kids, and can't do what we wanted to do. And join our sisters out there and be in solidarity with the mothers. We see every day lose their children online. So I just wanted to highlight this absolute, this crazy Garda tactics that happened there, and that was reported in the news as if because they had to do so. And then let's move on to other things, and then also just to highlight the individual action of people that can take responsibility for their individual behaviour. In that we can make a difference in what we do individually because we represent so many hundreds and thousands of others. If we download simple things like the Boycott app or the No Thanks app while we're shopping, scan to ensure that at least we're doing something, not to put money in the hands of these Nazis. And I call them that, which every acceptation of what they really are. I'm sorry, Georgia. I'm so angry. I don't know what else to do. So I'm glad. Well, I'm
glad you expressed your anger here in such a beautiful tongue, and finding the words that will have moved a very significant number of people. Many people will not know of what happened at the gates of the Dáil. I did myself, and it sums up the paradox that is Ireland. Ireland was one of the last countries in the world to recognize the state of Israel. Ireland is hated by Israel. The government of Netanyahu regularly name-checks Ireland and slanders the people there as anti-Semites, in other words, as foul, racist, fascists. And yet the good people of Ireland are the overwhelming majority of the country. But your government, for some bizarre reason, is deliberately oblivious to the rising tide of feeling on what's happening in Gaza, within Ireland, and indeed throughout the Western world, and including in the United States, and including amongst Jews in the United States, particularly young Jewish people. They are turning their faces away from all that and doubling down. This weird two-headed monster that is the Irish government is doubling down on its relationship with a country, Israel, that hates them. And they are dragooning the guards, who may not have needed much dragooning, to be ripping mothers off the gates of the Irish Parliament, the Dáil. It is truly astounding. I remember so well in our struggle against apartheid in South Africa, the role played by the Irish workers, shop workers in Duns, which entered the history books, was a seminal moment when they went on strike against apartheid goods. The role of the Irish people in the diaspora on the Palestine question is also second to none. You only have to look at Celtic Park every other week to see the role of the Irish in Scotland. It is an extraordinary paradox. One must assume that it cannot exist forever, and that a way will be found either to make the Irish government change or to change the Irish government. Thank you for that lovely call. A lot of comments on Tony Benn. Mine Cara says, my favourite Tony Benn statement is, I'm leaving Parliament to devote more time to politics. And Lu Ming Lam says, Ben was someone who wasn't a limited hangout or controlled opposition. No, definitely not. Terence is in Corby in England. Let's hear what he wants to talk about this evening. Terence, welcome.
Good evening, Mr. Galloway. That young journalist that's in Australia doing the issue of journalism, not jerkalism, very proud. It's nice to hear him. And the more outlets we get, MOATS TV and what have you, the more people can see what actually is going on. Coming back to Aoife's comment there, I was aware of what's going on in the Dáil, outside the Dáil, and I'm well aware of the Gardaí and Sakona and the orders they've been given. They don't like the orders they've been given. RTE, the main media, like the BBC Ireland, is riddled with UK and American influences, and they're doing everything to steal neutrality off the Irish people. And I'm Irish myself, Irish heritage. It's not going to happen. More journalists like Peter Taylor was well respected in Ireland. You go back to Pilger. These are the people we need. Assange, victors for truth. And the more we know what they're up to, the more we can hold them to account. But FIFA suggested that everyone can do something. And you're doing you a bit, and other avenues are doing a bit, but we have to keep the truth out there. They will try everything. And in Ireland, and I know RTE are desperate to get rid of Irish neutrality. They'll never do it. My daughter's middle name is Markiewicz after the Countess, and James Connolly's my go-to person. I've read in and out of James Connolly, and all against empire. We don't fight for any empire. You should not fight for an empire. You want the truth, the whole truth, and everybody knows the whole truth. And journalism at the moment, or jerkalism, like Jeremy Bowen, digging a little crater in the Ukraine, somebody taking a picture of him, a clown was outed for that. Now he's the top man in the BBC. It's a jerkalist. Journalists are like that young boy you've seen today, power to his elbow. To you, Mr. Galloway.
Beautiful, beautiful call, Terence. Agreed with every single word of it. Thanks for making it. Look, a big shout out to tonight's big donors who've been on to the MOATS.tv website since we came on air. Anthony Gratrex, Fadi Echeder, and Ali Tehrani. Please check out our new MOATS TV website. Make a donation, as these kind people, generous people, have just done. So a big thanks to Anthony, Fadi, and Ali. You can click on the Donate Now button, just like that. What reason do you have for not doing so? Let's go to Vancouver, one of my favourite cities, where Dalibor wants to talk about Canada. Dalibor, I hope I didn't offend earlier. Go ahead.
Oh, Mr. George, I hope you can hear me.
Yes,
and I
clear.
hope you can hear my myself through my Bosnian peculiar accent. But Greetings from the indigenous territories of the West Coast, unceded territories, so-called Vancouver. I had an impetus to call because you have been labeled by the people that I know here as a Trumpist and as a Putinite. And when you, Mr. Won your Rochdale seat, okay, I went to the Serbian Euronews website, and within 30 minutes, they pronounced you to be so-and-so. You know, when they asked me, well, how would you describe him? I said, I would describe him as a Christian socialist, committed person, about whom I've heard in 1990s, and I'm 50. So as a kind of a young boy, I just read your name in the newspapers, and I started following, like, you know, your commitment in Palestine, your commitment all over the world. So what I want to ask you is this. I offered my apologia for George Galloway. How would you offer yours? And
it's
with all due respect,
kind of you to have done so, but I would not deign to. I apologize for nothing. My views are entirely consistent, one with the other, and have been held all of my political life, certainly since encountering the great Tony Benn. So if you were to put a label on me, you could tell them I'm a Bennite. But I am prepared to allow my body of work over more than 50 years, that's a long time, to be judged. And the idea that I'm a Trumpist is perfectly preposterous, of course, as anyone who heard my monologue this evening would quickly have learned. It's certainly true that I preferred Trump over Kamala Harris only because I knew what Kamala Harris was doing. I had yet to see what Donald Trump would do. Now that I have seen what Donald Trump is doing, I'm against him also. I'm not any kind of ite or ist other than a socialist. I'm a common sense socialist. And by the way, one of my best ever speeches, if I say so myself, was in Vancouver, in a church in Vancouver. It's available on YouTube. Look it up and show it to your friends. That is me. Now, a poll update. We're closing the poll now. Should Germany be allowed to prepare for war? Yes or no? 21,553 of you voted in the end. On Telegram, 13% said yes. But mysteriously, as always, on X, 26% said yes. So a quarter of the votes cast on that portal were gung-ho for a re-armed Germany, a Fourth Reich. What could possibly go wrong? On the YouTube community poll, 28% said yes. And on the YouTube stream, 21% said yes. So a much larger number than might have been expected, but still an overwhelming majority for no. Germany should not be allowed to prepare for war. Now, Have It Out with Galloway is worth being on. Take a look at this. It'll tell you how you can be. Watch this. Join me on Have It Out with Galloway. Be on the studio wall. Participate in the debate about the greatest issues of our time. This is the place where we tackle the world's biggest problems and offer some of the world's best answers. You can have your say. Write to me at our website at haveitoutwithgalloway.com and join me here in the studio audience.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
take a call from Jim in Shaftesbury because it's about the Royal Albert Hall, one of my favourite places in Britain. Jim, what would you like to say about it?
Well, it's Tim actually, but...
I beg your pardon, Tim. I beg your pardon.
That's right. You said you were going to hopefully get Boris Johnson to appear with you.
To debate me in the Royal Albert Hall, yeah. He dodged it, of course.
Oh, really? He dodged it, did he?
Yeah, he doesn't get out of bed for less than £500,000, and we couldn't guarantee him that price, so he dodged it.
Oh, that's a real pity.
It would have been good, and I think we would have filled the Royal Albert Hall. I challenged Boris Johnson, the blood-soaked buffoon, former Prime Minister of Britain, to a public debate on the Ukraine in the Royal Albert Hall. I would have booked it. I would have paid the deposit. I know that if we built it, they would have come. And I know that we would have filled the Royal Albert Hall. And I would have donated my half of the takings to the children of Gaza, and he could have pocketed his half of the takings. But we couldn't guarantee enough money, I'm afraid, Tim. Any other points?
Because, you're talking about not getting our something to do it.
I'm losing you, Tim. I'm losing you, Tim. Call back.
I'm sorry.
Call back on Sunday, and we'll complete the conversation, because my good wife is in the studio. Gayatri, on the social media news roundup, what's rattling?
Well, lots of commentaries on the late and great Tony Benn, my side as well. David says, thank you for your great tribute for the late and great Tony Benn. I often worried who could fill his booth after his death, but you have done that job fantastically well. Mr. Benn would have been so proud.
Well, I think he would have been, and I have tried to, but I don't fill his boots. Nobody fills his boots. Mr. Benn had an education, had a history from the war, and with a father who was a cabinet minister. Mr. Benn had an erudition that I don't have. I have learned a lot from him, and I have learned a lot of public speaking from him. And I often find myself using some of his phrases. Somebody, as you know, somebody wrote to me once saying, I heard you say, never wrestle with a chimney sweep, you can't come out clean. And I heard Mr. Benn say the same thing. And both of you said that your old father had told you. Did you, by any chance, have the same father? So there are pitfalls in doing so, but I would not, and I don't think anybody else can, hold a candle to Mr. Benn. We must all strive to do the best we can.
Apart from the rest of your family having met him, I also had the honor to have met him in the Westminster Abbey area, wasn't it?
Westminster Hall. The conference hall, Westminster, yeah.
Where we caught him behind the scene, just
smoking,
before he was going to go on stage.
Smoking in the no-smoking building.
Pipe, indoors. I mean, it was a while ago, but not that long ago, so obviously it was already banned. Yeah. But there he was, and nobody could say anything. That was Mr. Tony Benn smoking his cigar.
Well, I have a picture of him holding my newborn daughter, Lucy, and a picture of him holding her firstborn of 5, Sean, who now works on this show. That's how long we were marching behind Mr. Benn.
God rest his soul. So on this day in 1982 was the seizure of the Falkland Island by Argentina. Oh, there he is. There's Sean.
Benn, yeah.
Oh, yeah, there's Sean with Mr. Tony Benn.
How wonderful.
How wonderful indeed. And actually, the next time that we saw Mr. Tony Benn was, well, we didn't see him, but the next occasion was just across from Westminster Hall at Westminster Abbey for his funeral.
Yeah. You saw him being carried out.
Yeah, indeed.
In front of quite a motley crew, actually. But he was very eclectic, Mr. Benn. He wouldn't have turned anyone away from his funeral.
So back to what happened on this day 43 years ago. So Argentine forces invaded and took Falkland Islands.
Is that the anniversary?
It's the anniversary. It's also known as the Malvinas Islands by the Argentine people. Now, This is an island off the coast in the Atlantic Ocean, basically, on the southeast coast of Argentina, 8,000 miles away from London, but it's British territory. And Thatcher, in response, dispatched her naval task force, which led to the Falkland War of 74 days, killing almost 900 military personnel. But the crux of this story is that today it has been released that it was mostly Israel behind arming the Argentine forces.
Israel and France are good friends, both.
But the peculiar thing about Israel promoting and supporting this war is that the Argentine dictatorship at the time was a very notorious anti-Semite. And so questioning why Israel would therefore arm Argentine, one of the Israeli officials answered, since when had ideology anything to do with the sale of arms?
Yes, it's something that all these, there is a class of people who are Union flag wavers and Israel flag wavers in the same picture, in the same avatar. They never respond when you point out that these British sailors and soldiers who were killed in the Falklands War were killed by Israeli weapons given to an anti-Semitic fascist dictatorship in Buenos Aires. Yeah. Because how could you answer that? Is it true that there was no ideology involved? I doubt it. South Africa, apartheid South Africa and Israel were the best of friends. The anti-Semitic fascist dictatorship in Argentina and Israel were the best of friends. Was it really only about business, or was ideology actually involved all along? I see that the madman president of Argentina now, Milei, he's saying that Hitler actually escaped Berlin in 1945 and lived 20 years in Argentina and fathered 2 children, which is very unlikely because he only had 1 ball, as the song rightly said. But he is said by the president of Argentina to have lived in Argentina until the early 1960s.
I mean, he said some outrageous things, but this is, I don't know whether this is the top 3 for sure.
Yeah.
Moving on to Elaine from Brighton, who writes, do you think the British spy and surveillance planes over Gaza gave orders to Israel to kill the recent journalist, bomb apartment blocks at 2 a.m., to kill yet more children, and the recent 15 ambulance staff? Can we now, as a collective, make a citizen arrest of Starmer for his vile, ongoing complicity of murder of civilians with no end in sight?
And well, I think you could if you could get near enough to him, but you'd be unlikely to. You yourself would be arrested if you tried. But there's a prima facie case for it. I certainly don't think the Royal Air Force planes out of Cyprus are giving orders to the Israelis. It's the other way around. The Israelis are giving orders to them. But they wouldn't have given orders to kill these people, but they definitely spotted all the targets. They definitely gave Israel. Otherwise, what else are they doing in their flights over Gaza?
Exactly. They're just touring.
They're not sightseeing or photographing a brochure for Jared Kushner's condominiums to be. They are spotting targets and conveying them to Israel to decide whom to kill and how.
In the same vein, Natalie Laverne says, just wanted to ask you if our famous Mr. Lemmy and Starmer are committing treason by taking orders and changing our foreign policies at the order of Israel and the USA, and even having the IDF top-knobs giving them instructions or making demands. She also asked whether it's possible to have citizen arrest. Well, we tried a citizen arresting
We tried to citizen
Tony
arrest
Blair.
Tony Blair and Alistair Campbell.
Alistair Campbell, and yeah, and we've got some very interesting...
During the making of our film, The Killings of Tony Blair.
We've got
it's actually one of the best bits about the film.
Yeah, we've got some very interesting footage of the Alistair Campbell one, don't we?
Indeed, we do.
So the poll then tonight, should Germany be allowed to prepare for war? George Garside says the parallels with 30s Germany are stark and real. His ambitions for a third term are also real. And Carl G. Sabatsky says, well, what could possibly go wrong? And on a side note, conscription existed in Germany since hundreds of years, when it was still Prussia, before it was abandoned in 2011. They've always been the fourth and fifth largest weapons manufacturers in the world already, so nothing is really going to change.
Well, nothing except an extra 800 billion euros from the German exchequer going into the war machine. At the end of that expenditure, Germany will be the overwhelmingly biggest military power in the continent of Europe. What could possibly go wrong?
And remember when we were in Berlin, we were trying to sit out, it was winter, but we wanted to sit out, have some heaters on, and they were actually not allowed to put those heaters on.
No.
So
even inside public buildings, it was freezing
just
cold.
turning off, well, just as well it's summer now, oh my God.
They were flying do you remember outside the town hall in Berlin?
Yep.
There were 3 Ukrainian flags, I think, 2 Israeli flags and 1 German flag.
And the EU flag.
And 1 EU flag. That's kind of what Germany has become. It's a collective madness, really, collective loss of all common sense. But the German people had the chance to vote just a few weeks ago for something different, and they didn't take it. So I'm afraid that if you make your bed, you have to lie in it.
Yeah.
One more?
John C. says, never in a million years should Germany have been allowed to arm. History tells us that much of the 2 world wars for those who wish to forget. I do not. My father fought the German Nazis, and they are still in silent force for now.
Well, our friend who is seemingly back on social media in English, she said today that she quoted German media, Bild, saying Germany is ready to leave the past behind. And Margarita Simonionova, she said, well, it's funnily enough, Russia remembers Germany's past perfectly. I thought it was very, very well observed.
And they do. They do. Every year they commemorate, they march for Victory Parade, and that is definitely lacking here.
We hope to be there. I mean, we haven't actually got the formal invite yet, but we hope to be in Moscow for the Victory Day. Thank you, Gayatri. Let's take one final call, because it is from Vancouver. Juan, who wants to talk about Trump and Canada, and it's only fair to hear. Welcome. Go ahead.
Thank you, George. Thank you for taking my late call. I'm not in Vancouver. I am in the city of Nanaimo on Vancouver Island in the Pacific of British Columbia.
Yeah.
And this city is, I have to say this, is in unceded territory of the native people of this island.
Amen.
What I want to say is that I am a Mexican-Canadian dual citizen. I have lived in Canada for 25 years. My 2 kids from my first wife were born in Canada. My second wife, Mexican as well, died at the age of 37 from cancer 3 years ago on this island. So the fact that Donald Trump is uttering every single day the nonsense of basically invading, annexing Canada is for me, as a Mexican and as a Canadian, the most insulting thing that I have ever taken in my heart. And let me tell you that if such thing happens, I will be, with all my heart, and even though I am a full pacifist, ready to take my arms, which I don't even have. I'm not a soldier. I have never fought. I have never fired a gun in my entire life. But I will defend this country because despite I am a very hard critic of Canada and its colonialist heart, it is my home. And this country received me as a Mexican 25 years ago. So I will not hesitate to defend Canada from the invaders at any cost, including my own life.
Well, very stirring words indeed. That'll make a great clip and we'll get quite an audience reaction. And I'm glad that you made it here on the Mother of All Talk Shows. Trump is right now addressing the world, revealing all his global tariffs, you know, his new toy tariffs. And we'll have all the latest on those on Sunday's show. Alas, we don't have time for any more calls. So I'll have to bid you good night with two appeals. One is to make sure you donate, or the Wednesday show at least is under threat. We started on one show a week. We moved to two. They've been going great, but we can't keep them going without your support. And the second is, bring another viewer with you on Sunday at the same time, the same place. Thanks for watching.
It's the mother of all talk shows. It's the mother of all talk shows. It's the mother of all talk shows.
Go get 'em, George.